2019's Resident Evil 2 drips. That's the best word to describe Capcom's remake of the Raccoon City police station. Just 8 minutes in, the city is in a literal storm as well as a figurative one. The rain soaks our characters, puddles splash beneath our feet, the blood and goo leaks from every possible orifice. Zombies dribble from windows and tight corners. The slow pace of the zombies slugging towards you is at the very speed of a trickling faucet. Resources and ammunition are the perfect level of sparse that it feels like they're, well, trickling into the game world. The shiny new incarnations of Leon and Claire are so ridiculously sexy that they are, in the most urban dictionary of definitions, a couple of drips. Even on the PS1, these two were easily my first proper fictional crushes. Hot damn! It's a very different style of horror to Resident Evil 1, where that game embraced its pastiche design to take on that very specific old school horror that feels creepy simply because it's old. Resident Evil 2 Make is a celebration of its past and an examination of its present. Despite its flaws, it was my 2019 Game of the Year. Yep, it beat that too. Oh, I'm sorry to say it definitely beat that. But I'd argue that its opening doesn't necessarily showcase what makes it such a mouth-watering, grim experience to shut yourself into for a few hours. After the first 10 minutes, you just make it to the police station, where the game officially starts to let us in on its steady menace, snapping at the player's heels. Instead, Resident Evil 2 has a very different goal for how it wants to make its player feel in its first moments. It's more interested in making you panic than breathe the infected cobwebs of a musty mansion. But just because it's a different feeling of horror doesn't necessarily mean it's worse. So, let's break down just how effective Resi 2's opening is. This is the first 10 minutes.
Man, I'm serious, okay? I saw this with my own eyes.
Oh, I believe you, buddy. I believe you. Just tell us a story. Tell us a story.
Okay.
The game's first image is appropriately grotesque. We know just 3 seconds in that Remake 2 is more interested in the grossness of its horror, doubling down on its shock factor to reel the player in like a mangled fish. The truck driver's teeth sink into a burger, purposefully lacking in the sort of fresh, vibrant colours you typically see elsewhere in the game, like, say, with Claire's jacket. Instead, it's grey, more similar to the decaying flesh of zombies. This is our first hint that Resident Evil 2 wants the player to shudder and giggle at its gore. It's a very different vibe to how Resident Evil 1 doesn't care about how far the player gets in the Spencer Mansion. Resident Evil 2 wants you to embrace its horror and use it like fuel to prepare yourself further. There's a beautifully disgusting irony in how muted the body horror is in this opening. The burger is a minging first shot, but it's not bloody, it's not deathly. That steady climb of tension from the first game is still here, thick and gloopy though. After the close-up of the chewing of the burger, the radio gives us an audio description of what the zombies will look like. You had to see her eyes, her nose, her whole face looked like it was rotting, and the fact that the game is opening so jovially with the artificially delighted radio presenter cackling out of the speaker, there's such an awareness in Resi's beginning of its audience. It knows that you know that it's a horror game, just the very act of booting it up means you're ready to get spooked. So the fact that the first 30 seconds of our screen time are given over to a burger fake-out and the ridiculous happiness of the radio presenters feels so wrong. It implements a tonal dissonance where the first game applied indifference. The player has this weird crawling sensation on the back of their neck, a question creeping across their brain. Why is the game having fun? This is a horror game. Characters shouldn't be laughing about zombies. The zombies are scary. I've seen the trailers. The game knows that I've seen the trailers. But the game knows that I know that it knows that I've seen the trailers. All of this is playing on our expectations of what the game is going to be, and because it feels so very wrong, it's enough to instill a crawling paranoia on the player. Even as the trucker hits the girl, it's framed as a flash in the dark, a slow beat of blood pooling from the fender on a huddled, bloodless mass lying in the road. The trucker turns his back on the corpse, and we see the girl slowly rise behind him. She's dressed in creams and beiges, and we don't see an ounce of red splotched on her face or body. The game is hiding the gore. It's similar tactics to what Resident Evil 1 adopted with the dogs. The small details without revealing the whole to hide the true grotesqueness for later, but that harsh cut to black is all the game needs to bring us in. It's the perfect, momentary deflation of tension. We've been introduced to the threat of the zombies in-world, the characters in the game snickering at their inception, but the game saves the real fear for when the player has the controller in their hands. Whether you choose Leon or Claire for your first 10 minutes, your opening will be almost identical. Both are salutes to the Resident Evil legacy. The game knows that you're looking forward to seeing Claire or Leon, and specifically the leading shot of Claire really takes its time. Slow zoom-ins on her jacket, her bike, her helmet. She's in town looking for her brother Chris. The very fact she's on a motorbike in this torrential weather rather than, say, a car is here for one reason and one reason only: to paint Claire Redfield as a certifiable badass. Which means that when the horror of the night drags her in, kicking and screaming, it's all the more terrifying to feel that fall from grace. Leon's introduction is almost wordless, letting the rock music blaring from his speakers do all the talking. Catching a glimpse of the interior of the car though, the flash of the folder from Raccoon City Police Department also sets expectations for how capable he is. He's a cop. It's a bit of a demotion from Resi 1's Special Tactics and Rescue Service, sure, but Leon is still a cop. He's probably shot people before. This shooting zombie stuff is gonna be a cinch for someone like that. Right? The abandoned police car at the gas station immediately kills that belief. Bloodied footsteps are pitted towards the front entrance. Entering the station, our characters find a handy torch, and as we pick it up, we immediately see more spatterings of blood on the floor. There's no music in the gas station, just hollow echoes, so that every rustle, every step, and especially every little moan and gasp coming from the injured attendant is explicit. Not only do they sound like a zombie, but when the attendant doesn't reply to Leon or Claire's "You alright?" and instead makes a slow motion with their arm, it looks for a second like they might be infected, but no, they're still conscious, and your paranoia can rest at ease. They're just motioning further into the station for you to follow. The environments of Resident Evil 2 are much more focused on realism in their proportions to the characters than Resident Evil 1 was. Because the camera is now styled behind Leon and Claire in third-person shooter style, the environments don't need to be as tall or as long to give the camera places to, well, live. Instead, the rooms are simply smaller. It's the level design and lighting which carries a lot of the spooky joy of 2-make. Corridors are narrower, debris often litters the way to funnel you into streamlined pathways which directly put you into the reach of zombies. The game is as dark as Wesker's sex dungeon, though I bet you'd wear those damn sunglasses anyway, wouldn't you, Wesker? And again, because of the darkness, the player needs to play slowly so they don't miss anything. The game is littered with details and clues to puzzles and upcoming threats, and the game tutorializes the importance of acknowledging these details when the door behind us is slammed shut by the attendant. Now, if you don't take the time to notice this and figure out that you'll need to plan an alternative route back, then in a few moments when you're attacked by an honest-to-God zombie, you're going to be dinner. It's a micro piece of player conditioning which is so important to your chances of survival later. All of the little expectations we've developed in that slow burn of paranoia comes to a satisfying explosion when we finally find the cop who abandoned his car. Our suspicions at the fact the game has glorified its repulsiveness while also minimizing the gore get to be sadistically satisfied as we see him fall to the floor and have his throat ripped out for far, far longer than it needs to be. Again, the game is enjoying this. You wanted gore, you've got gore. I wasn't lying when I said Resident Evil 2 drips. The meat and blood looks slick in the lighting engine, contrasted only by the dusty dry textures of the zombie's skin as it looks up, straight into the camera. Not necessarily seeing Leon or Claire, but the player, involving you in the horror just like its predecessor's zombie introduction did. And the fact that it's a cop on the ground reinforces this dissipation of badassery we began to feel when we saw his car, empty and isolated out front. If this guy couldn't handle zombies, what chance do Leon and Claire have? Our main characters' respective naiveties are shown to the player immediately when Leon tells the zombie to freeze, I'll shoot, and Claire yells at the flesh-hungry monster to oi, don't come any closer. The game traps you in this long corridor, much too skinny to run around the zombie, forcing you to fight it rather than run away. There's a distillation of the immediate scare as it transforms into full-blown panic. It doesn't matter how perfect your shots are, the zombie will always come back to life after it drops to the floor for the first time, and in order to finish it off, you'll use up more than a good chunk of ammunition, simply lucky if you're left with just 1 or 2 spare bullets after the confrontation. And this is saying nothing of how Resident Evil 2's combat juggles distance and accuracy. Despite the fact we have a more focused view of our enemies in Remake, it keeps the panic palpable by just how small the aiming reticle is. It's so small, and even the slightest of nudges on the analog stick opens it right out like a gaping maw, increasing the chances of a misfire and wasting one of those precious bullets. Because the reticle is small and so prone to having an aneurysm, it undermines the rational belief that keeping your distance is always the best strategy. Simply being closer to a zombie increases the chance of an all-important headshot, or better yet, an elbow or knee shot. But, of course, the closer you are to a zombie, the easier it is for them to get the chomp on you. As a result, forcing the player to fight their first zombie means that this careful balance is ingrained in you. Every millisecond of a confrontation is important, and it makes the combat feel more fast-paced than the slow, steady trod of Resi 1's opening minutes. Picking up the nearby key teaches us the importance of unlocking doors to find little shortcuts and ways to circumnavigate enemies, but returning to the main part of the gas station, all hell breaks loose with just 3 zombies in this small cramped space. The aisles again forcing the player down specific paths, leading you closer to danger. This isn't a mob of zombies, it's just 3, and the shock of seeing them drizzle into your path will again make the player panic and see these slow walkers as a pounding, powerful threat.
Whoa, don't shoot!
Get down!
This scene is why I'll always recommend a first-time player picks Claire first if they want to really give in to the horror. The scene plays out the same way no matter who you pick, but if you're controlling Claire, the scene depicts Leon as a more powerful and capable character than you are. Claire has just barely survived a short journey into a gas station, and just as the player is beginning to catch their breath, they're met with RPD officer Leon Smooth as Butter Kennedy telling us to get down and one-shotting a zombie right behind us without even blinking. The player feels powerless in comparison to Leon, adding to the dread.
Yeah, Leon Kennedy. You are?
Ah, look how cool he is. By the 7-minute mark, Leon and Claire are snug in the police car, partnered up, making their introductions on the way to Raccoon City. It looks like this friendship will carry us through the rest of the game. Maybe that opening was just to show us how weak we are when we're alone. But when the pair are slowed to a stop in the city swarmed by hundreds of zombies, the trucker from the beginning comes crashing into the cop car and the two are separated. The fast, shaking camera shots are intense, alongside the quick cuts and even quicker rip from the comfort of the car, that panic is back once again when you're suddenly sliced from your friend by fire and gameplay is given back to you. That soaked aesthetic continues as you race through Raccoon City. Back near the car, a swarm of zombies stagger towards you, and the fact we've recently used our small handful of bullets already in the gas station means that the player is discouraged from trying to battle through them. Resident Evil 2 Remake strikes the perfect balance between fight or flight. In fact, I'd argue that it's the most effective meditation between the two in the entire series. The player must assess a situation, the resources they carry, and the potential threat of an enemy to decide if now is the time to wail on them or if now is the time to retreat. The experience in the gas station taught us that sometimes combat is the only option. Being stranded in Raccoon City teaches us that fleeing is a possibility as well. We are so underpowered and the odds are so stacked against us that the player has no choice but to helplessly follow the walls of fire and the zombies waving their red flags in the hope that safety is just around the corner. Lucky for us, our 10 minutes come to a close when we reach the famous police station. The bright letters, illuminated like a halo against the murky skybox, scream safe place. And in those final precious seconds, drenched by the panic of the slow burn, the confrontation in the gas station, and the race through the city streets, the player is rewarded with the golden sheen of the police station's entrance hall, momentarily hailing salvation from the steady drip of horror and rain outside. But it's the soundtrack which does the heavy lifting here. Now, this isn't a comparison between the remake and the original game, and I know, trust me, I know that the new soundtrack is contentious, original OST for life, but the music which plays when we reach the main hall is still haunting and effective in what it's moulding in our initial impressions. Let's take a listen. The calming, steady pluck of strings is there to reinforce that momentary safety we feel as we collect the nearby handgun bullets and first aid spray. We heard on the car radio that the RPD was a bunker during the early hours of the outbreak, that this is where people went to feel safe, and that's what that melody is trying to convey, but it's countered by two important additions. The first is the rumbling echo we can hear underneath. Resident Evil 1's remake adopts a similar tactic. The fact that the soundtrack is echoing gives more gravitas to the size of the RPD. This isn't just an entrance hall, it's a chamber. And the second is those ominous metallic whines, like distant doors opening and closing while enemies hunt for us. It's likely that the player will begin noticing just how present these two sound effects are as they see the barrels filled with blood-soaked bandages, and we realise how dark and empty the RPD is. And that's where the opening leaves you. For 10 seconds, the game drops its freneticism and returns to the slow, dripping build of tension, resetting Leon, Claire, and the player. Because just a few moments after this opening, that drip is going to turn into a torrent, and to embrace the panic once more. Thanks for watching. This is video 2 in an 8-episode series focusing on analysing the openings of Resident Evils 1 through 7, building up to a full-blown critique of Resident Evil Village when it comes out in a few weeks. Oh, and just a quick note that the Sexy Wesker clip wasn't mine. I can't take credit for that, so thanks to Kiss Mobile Mux for uploading that abomination to YouTube for me to nick. If you liked what you saw, consider liking and subscribing, and as always, take care.